Hi, this is Natalie. Thank you for listening to Crossroads Church, where we are bringing a real God to real people. I believe you'll be inspired by today's message.
All right, so we're going to continue. Oh, by the way, that book, I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But anyway, we're going to continue on this series today called Get Out of God's Way. And what I'm going to talk to you about this morning, I just want to give you you ever heard these things called trigger warnings? Like what I'm about to say might make you go, you got to give people a trigger warning. You got to warn them. So I'm giving you a trigger warning. Some of you this morning are going to go, man, I knew I liked that guy Joel, right? After this message. Others of you are going to go, oh, Joel, I don't know if you should be saying those things right now. Okay? So here's what I'm going to ask of you. If you would just repeat this after me. Joel, I'm open-minded. Give me your best shot. All right, now keep your mind open because what I'm going to share with you this morning is going to be a little bit jolting for some of you, and some of you are going to go, oh, I just don't know if that's the thing that you should be saying right now. And others are going to be like, yeah, finally somebody's saying that, okay? Now that everybody's nervous, we'll get started here. When I was in my junior year of college, which is actually when I met Marcus and Natalie, it's just 10 years ago. No, I'm just kidding. It's a long time ago. I went on a trip and I climbed a mountain in Russia. And while I was in Russia, I felt like God gave me this vision to start leading people on outdoor adventures around the world. And I didn't know what I was doing. In fact, I thought I was going to go to law school. I was planning to take the LSAT, go to law school. Well, that senior year of college, God started working in my life, and I felt like I wanted to start taking people on outdoor adventures around the world to help them get a change of perspective on their lives through a change of pace and a change of place, change it all up, and then let God show them kind of what their future and plan is for them, having to do with vision. And so I came up with this idea that I was going to start leading backpacking teams around the world for 4 months at a time. And I looked up organizations that were doing this. Nobody else was doing this 4 months at a time. I mean, who can take off 4 months anyways? And so I kind of had this target audience of people. But this was before social media really had taken off. I didn't know really I had a MySpace, if you remember that. But I didn't know really how to find people to even do this with me. And I didn't really know anybody. I hadn't been working at a church. I'd been attending, but I didn't know what I was doing, is the bottom line. And I remember one day I finally kind of committed to it. I was like, we're going to do this, Dad. And I was talking to my dad. I was like, but Dad, I'm going to have to quit my job to do this. And he's like, yeah, you will have to quit your job to do that. And I said, and second of all, what if I make this big hoopla about this, tell everybody I'm going to go do this, and then nobody comes on the trips with me? And he's like, well, you already have one guy, don't you? And I was like, oh, yeah, I do have one guy. A friend of mine named Brad had committed to go with me on the trip. And it was a 4-month trip. We were going to fly one way to Central America and work our way back to the U.S. by ground, just working our way back to the U.S. And he's like, well, you and Brad are going to have a really great time. And I was like, but that'll be so embarrassing if I tell all these people I'm going to lead a team and it's my team of one. Like, onward through the charge. And I'd be like, yeah, whatever, bro, let's go. So I was really nervous about it. And anyways, I gave myself a little graduation present from college. And my graduation present from college was I was going to go to Australia and New Zealand for a backpacking trip for 3 weeks. So I flew down to Australia, and the guy that was supposed to go with me canceled at the last minute. So it was literally me just hiking around in Australia and New Zealand. And I went, and when we were in Sydney, Australia, I wanted to go to the church Hillsong Church. And I went there, and I'll never forget, as soon as I walked in, somebody was like, hey, mate, how are you doing? And I was like, hey, I'm doing good, and I just kind of wanted to, I wanted to hang out in the back row so I could leave early, honestly. I just wanted to hear the music. But sorry, Brian Houston. He's the pastor there. Anyway, so I'm sitting in the church, and this guy comes up to me. He's like, hey, what are you doing? And blah, blah, blah. What do you do for a living? And I was like, well, I just quit my job. I'm going to go start leading outdoor adventures around the world in Central America. And he's like, Central America? I've got a friend that wants to go to Chile. And I was like, Chile's not in Central America, but that's cool. So the service is starting to end, right? And I'm like, okay, this is my moment to slip out. But I see this guy across the arena. It's a massive church. And this guy is laser focused on me. And he's moving around people to get to me. And I'm like, that guy's coming to talk to me. Oh, no. I just wanted to go on my backpacking adventure, right? Man, I'm like, should I go? And so I turn to leave, and he starts running. The church, they're doing an altar call, and this guy's running at me. And he comes to me, he's like, hey, are you the guy that's doing the trips in Central America? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, mate, I want to go to Chile. And I was like, that's cool. Chile's not in Central America. He's like, yeah, but let's hang out. And I was like, All right. So I went over to his house. We hung out. I ended up staying at his house, slept on his couch, and that was that. So I went off, did my Australia thing, went and swam, scuba dived in the Barrier Reef, and I got this email from him, and he said, hey, man, I just signed up to go on your trip to Central America. My first guy that signed up was a dude from Australia. And I'll never forget getting that email and thinking, oh, there's going to be 3 of us at least. It's like, yeah, this won't be so bad. A team of 2 is actually a team. And here's the really crazy part about it. After that, it's like people just started signing up left and right while I was in Australia. Wasn't even around to control and manage things. Remember we talked about that last week? It's like God was like, hey, watch this. Here's a really crazy thing. That guy, Brad, that was going to go on the trip with me, he ended up marrying the Australian guy's sister. Joelle Malm, international dating consultant. And here's another one. I'll just give you this one for free. I took a guy to China, and he ended up getting married to a missionary he met in China. 2 for 2. But then I had another girl that came on the trip engaged, and halfway through the trip, she broke off the engagement with her fiance. So it was I'm like a -1. Yeah, anyway. Man, that girl's mom called me. She was angry, man. She called the cell phone. I was like, hello. And she's like, this is so-and-so's mom. What are you doing down there? Like, nothing. I'm just leading team. And she's like, she just broke up with her fiance, and it's my pastor's son. Do you know what I'm going to have to deal with? And I was like, anyway, all that to say, we started doing these trips, and I ended up with 12 people on my first trip with no marketing, no advertising. It was all God providing the people. And then I had a whole other fear. I'm like, what if I have no clue what I'm doing when we get down with these 12 people and everything goes horribly? And here's the thing about it. Like, there's always fears. Even when things are going well, have you always noticed there's something more you can worry about? It's like things are going so well. Oh no, now what if I mess it up? Right? You were worried that nothing good would happen, and then something good happened, and you're like, oh no, now what if I lose the good thing that happened? And we've all got these worries, we've all got these fears, and God can be blessing us like crazy, and we're like, oh, but what if? What if? What if? And then here's what I know about you. Like, every one of you in this room, if we were to talk for a few minutes, there's something right now that you know, like deep in your heart, you need to do this. But the thing that's going on in your mind is, but what if I do that and this happens? What if I talk to my son about his behavior and he cuts me off and I don't get to see my grandkids? What if I quit my job and to start this new business and the business goes south and I can't get my job back in this economy? What if things get worse with this virus and I end up losing my job? My friends lost their job because they were non-essential, but what if they decide I'm non-essential? What if? What if? What if? What if my marriage falls apart? All these marriages around me, they're falling apart. I'm seeing divorce everywhere. What if we end up getting divorced? There's all these things. What if? And there's these fears and these worries, and there's some things that God's asking you to do. Maybe some things to confront, but you're saying, man, if I do that, what if it goes south? And there's other things that you're looking around, you're going, what if this comes upon me? And we've all got these crazy fears. And I want to talk to you this morning about how God will often call us to take a risk at the worst possible time. See, faith, I think we all believe as Christians, we want faith. I believe even non-Christians, they say, I want faith. I even hear non-Christians say, you just got to have faith. I'm like, faith in what? Because, man, if I have faith in myself, it's not going to go well. What do we got to have faith in? And here's the thing about faith. Faith, you do not need faith when everything is sunshine and unicorns prancing in the sky. You only need faith when it gets really, 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 really dark and you can't see what's ahead. And it's oftentimes in the darkest moments that God will say to you, I need you to do something. And you're going to go, oh, whoa, bad time, God. If you would have asked me in January, that would have been great. That was when I was doing my New Year's resolutions. I had no idea this pandemic was coming. This is a really bad time to do that, God. This is a really bad time to confront that. This is a really bad time to step out. And God's going to say, okay. But what I have for you is on the other side of this, like the Joseph Campbell thing. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. We've been talking about this idea of getting out of God's way. And last week we talked about how God is always at work around you. We've been looking at the life of Peter. And we see that Peter was minding his own business, fishing. He was a fisherman out there. Jesus shows up, and in one day, like the whole trajectory of his life changes when God starts doing his miracles, and Peter gets in line with what God's doing, and all of a sudden, Peter starts being part of these miracles. And we see throughout Peter's life over and over again this pattern of Peter he's just kind of a crazy dude. But there's a little bit of Peter in all of us. There's a little bit of doubt. There's a little bit of fear. There's a little bit of impetuousness, just jumping out and then going, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And we're going to look at a story of Peter today that I think just exemplifies what God calls us to do. And it's a story you're familiar with, but I'm hoping you've never heard it from this angle, because I had never heard it from this angle, and I've been hanging out in the church for 40-something years. But when I was reading it this week, I felt like I saw something from a whole new angle. That's the thing about the Word of God, the amazing thing about the Word of God. It's always ever kind of revealing itself to you. It's this truth that is constantly, it's like a giant mountain. You look at the mountain one way, and it's like, wow, that's the mountain. And then you walk around a little bit, you're like, wow, that's the mountain. And then you walk around a little bit more, and you're like, oh my goodness, that's the mountain. And it's this, the truth of who God is huge. And at different seasons in our life, he reveals things in different ways. And this is what I feel like he was speaking to me about this passage. It's a story of, you're familiar with it, right? So Peter and all of the disciples, they're together. And what's fascinating is this happens right after Jesus has fed the 5,000. Remember that story? Jesus takes just a few resources and feeds all these people, and they're blown away by the miracle. He just takes a couple loaves and some fish and feeds all these people. They're just like, this is incredible. And it says, immediately after that miracle, he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, that's of the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. So Jesus is like, guys, I'm going to go pray. Again, I think Jesus was an introvert. He's like, I got to get some time to myself here. He sends the boys, the motley crew of disciples, across the Sea of Galilee, and they start going. So he goes to pray. Well, when evening came, he was there alone praying. But the boat by this time was a long way off from the land and was being beaten by the wind. For the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. God is all-powerful. The laws of nature do not apply to him. He made nature. There's no degrees of difficulty with him. To the infinite, all finites are equal. Walking on water, healing cancer, stopping a pandemic, one touch of his favor can do it. So what's this? He just walks on water. But when the disciples saw him walking on the water on the sea, they were terrified. Terrified. We see this so much when they see with Jesus, like at work, they're just terrified. And isn't that the case so many times that when God is doing his greatest work, it's right in the middle of our fear? And they said, it's a ghost. Like, oh my gosh. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, take heart, it's me. Don't be afraid. Again, Jesus is always saying, don't be afraid. Guys, don't be afraid. And they're like, what's happening here? Don't be afraid. And Peter. It's always and Peter did something crazy. The next 4 weeks we're going to see, or next 3 weeks we're going to see, and Peter did something crazy. Something amazing happens and Peter does something crazy. All right. And Peter answered, hey, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. That's a weird response to me. But Peter just tends to talk before he thinks. You know, right? That's where we can all relate to him too. So Jesus said, all right, come on. So Peter gets out of the boat and he walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and he began to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, here's what's fascinating about this passage to me. We always focus on this. I've heard a lot of sermons about this. Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? This is what blew me out about this verse. The dude walked on water. And here's the question. If he got to Jesus, but he was sinking, how did he get back in the boat? You think Jesus carried him? He was a grown man. No, Jesus is like, here, come here, buddy. Hold my hand. Let's walk back together. The dude walked on water when he was with Jesus. Now, here's what's interesting about this passage. It says, and they were amazed, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, remember, they had just watched him feed 5,000 people with just a few loaves. They knew Jesus was something. Here's what's interesting. Here's what I think they were so amazed at. I'm reading a little into the text. They were saying, Jesus, we know you're something. We've seen you healing people. We've seen you doing something. But we know Peter. That's amazing. That loser just walked on water. We've been hanging out with him for years. There is nothing special about Peter except he says dumb stuff and he gets himself in all sorts of trouble. And the dude walked on water. It says, like, he walked with them. And so they knew Jesus was something. But what I think really stood out to them was that Jesus took a guy who was a bumbling fool. And he said, hey, buddy, all you got to do is get out the boat, hang on to me, and amazing things will happen. But you got to get out the boat. And that's what I think is awesome about this passage, because this promises hope for all of us. It's not dependent on your cognitive ability, your smarts, your intelligence, your upbringing, where you came from. Peter was a fisherman. Jesus says, hey, anybody that wants to do this thing, to do these amazing things, he says, in fact, even greater things than this you will do if you just follow me. All you got to do is have the faith to step out and be courageous at a really bad time. It'd be one thing if the lake was placid. It was a calm, placid. It wouldn't have mattered if the verse would have said, it was a calm, placid day. And Jesus came sliding upon the water. No, it says there's this storm out there. It's like winds are beating against the boat, and these guys are trying as hard as they can, and nothing's happening. And Jesus is like, hey, guys, right at the worst time, Peter jumps out. And so here's what I think this message is saying to us. Your courage in the middle of difficulty shows the world who Jesus is more than anything you could ever say. I believe in Jesus. I go to church every Sunday, but you're just as afraid as everybody else. People, a lot of times people can't listen to us because they're too busy watching us. I mean, we say it this way: actions speak louder than words. Now, when I talk about risk, I want to make this something really clear, okay? We're going to continue this message talking about risk, but I want to make something really clear. I'm talking about God-honoring risk, okay? It's one thing to go jump out of a plane, skydive out of an airplane. That's cool, whatever, but I don't really think that's God-honoring risk. God-honoring risk, the kind of risk I'm talking about, is any risk you take in obedience to God that shows your hope is in Him alone. Not in how much money you got, not in your life insurance policy, not in your job, not in your strong marriage, not in whatever it is, how much you know, how much you have, who you know. It's any risk that God asks you to do. And here's the thing, guys, you don't have to come up with risky things to do for God. We talked about that last week. He's going to put things in front of you. He's going to ask you to do those things. And all you need to do is just obey those things. And when you obey those things, there's a good chance people are going to look at you and go, you are a fool. You're a fool. And we're right in the middle of this right now. Some people, they feel like God's given them a clear directive. They're living it out, and people are saying, you're a fool. Don't you see what's going on around? My parents, we talk about your actions speak louder than your words. My parents, when I was 9 years old, my mother went through a massive bout with anxiety. I actually recorded a little video on Facebook about this recently, and a lot of people are watching it. It's about how to not pass fear onto your kids. So if you want to check that out, it's on YouTube or on my Facebook. You can add me as a friend. But my mom, when I was about 9 years old, she went through this massive bout of anxiety. I remember watching her one time in the kitchen just break down in tears. And I went to my dad. I'm like, Dad, is Mom going to die? And he said, no, Mom's not going to die. She's just really struggling right now. And man, for years, we felt the weight of that anxiety. And my mom, she grew up in a home with a lot of anxiety. My grandparents were the most anxious people you would ever meet. My grandpa grew up, he had polio as a child, so he lost his ability to walk. His whole life he was handicapped. He was always worried about his security. My grandmother had disabilities as well. They were both disabled. And so my mother grew up that constant anxiety of it. And the worst part about it, in her home, they didn't ever talk about it. So it was just, you don't fear these things. Mom mentioned in this podcast I did with her, which you could check that out too. It's the longer version of the interview. She said that whenever these sirens used to go off for during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the siren used to go off every Tuesday to warn you if there was going to be a nuclear attack. She said it would just scare me the whole day. She's like, but I knew I couldn't talk to my parents about it because their fear was passing off on me, and there's just all this fear in this home. So this is what my mom grew up under. And she started passing it on to me, just without even realizing it, because she was dealing with her own issues. But here's the crazy thing that happened, okay? Right in the middle of my mom's panic and anxiety, my dad felt like God was calling our family to move to Central America, to a country called Guatemala, which at the time was in the middle of a civil war. And it was a violent civil war. You didn't know who the good guys were and the bad guys were. They were scooping kids off the street, turning them into soldiers. People were blowing up bridges. Right in the middle of that, my dad felt like God was saying, take your family to Guatemala to be missionaries. And my dad started talking to some advisors. And some advisors said, are you sure you've heard from the Lord on this? And he's like, I think so. And a couple people were like, well, you know what you're doing to your marriage. Your wife is struggling with anxiety. This is a very bad time to be going to a country where people are blowing things up. And he went around and he sought a lot of counsel, but the consistent message he heard was, if you really feel God is telling you to do it, we support you. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people that really didn't have skin in the game with him, people that didn't really believe in him, were saying, that's a foolish thing to do. You're going to ruin your marriage. You're going to ruin your kids. You're going to put your kids' life in danger. But my dad, man, he just felt right inside of him. He's like, this is what we're supposed to do. We moved to Guatemala. And do you know what happened? God healed my mother's anxiety. Like that. Like that. Now, she said it would still come back. She had to beat it down. But man, here's the thing, guys. Your courage, your willingness to do what God says you to do, it speaks way more about your faith than anything you'll ever say. You can know the Bible better than anybody in here. But if you're not willing to act on what God has said, nobody cares. Actions speak louder than words. My mother, when she took that action, and here's the thing, God honors action. Faith is being so confident that God's words are true that you step out and say, okay, I believe this so much that even if I fall flat on my face, I believe you're big enough to pick me up. Even if I die, I believe you're going to take care of my family. I believe you're going to, and again, you've got to be wise. Listen, I'm not talking about doing reckless things. I'm talking about being obedient to what God asks you. Even if it makes you look foolish, even if everybody around you is saying, you're an idiot. You are a total idiot. You are reckless. You are endangering people's lives. Who do you think you are? And this is why it's so important that you go in with humility. You humbly pursue whatever God's asking you to do. You've got to do it humbly. Because if you go in arrogantly, first of all, God's not going to ask you to do something arrogantly. He may ask you to do something boldly, but boldness isn't arrogance. Boldness is, I'm 60% sure God is telling me to do this. So I'm going to take the first step. And here's the cool thing about God. He never asks you to take big leaps. He just asks you to take small steps towards the thing you fear. And that's how you conquer the things you fear. It's like an inoculation. Take that shot. For the last few months, had a lot of allergies, and I went to this allergist, and he started injecting me with the thing I'm allergic to. Every week, he'd up the dose, and my arm would get swollen, and more swollen, and my body and my eyes would itch. And last week, I got my final dose. And you know what? I haven't had allergies in a long time, because little by little, I've been building resistance. Life doesn't get easier, but we get stronger. Faith builds that when we're courageous, when we take steps. And this is the really big thing, guys. Courage is contagious. All it takes is one person to break through the wall, and everybody's like, oh, we can get through that wall. And you know this because you've had experiences where you were like, that's the scariest thing ever. And then you got out and you did it a little bit, and then it like lost its fear, and you're like, oh, I could do that again. And then you did it again, and you did it again, and you did it again. It's kind of like driving. Remember when you first started driving? For most of us, it was a scary thing. But then you get out, but then little by little, now it's like you don't even think about driving, which shows in your driving. But isn't that the truth? Little by little, it just builds, and you get stronger and you get stronger. And that's what God made you to do. You are not weak. You may feel weak, but you're not made to be weak. You're made to be strong, but you only get stronger by exposing yourself to the things that you're afraid of little by little, and you get stronger. And people will think you're crazy until they say you're not. I love this quote. It's one of my favorites. My favorite author, G.K. Chesterton. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he's to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living. I got to get back to my family. I've got to get back to my family. He needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and yet drink death like wine. Isn't that, like, that's a manly, It's womanly too, but I think it hits guys in a different way. There's just something about courage, man. It's contagious, and all it takes is one person saying, we're not going to take this anymore. I'm going to obey God. Now, and here's the thing. Let's make this really practical. There's so many people living in fear right now because they're living on a steady diet of fear. And you know what? If I live on a steady diet of Doritos, just give it a few months. It's not going to look good. Okay? This is what's happening to us. Fear sells. It drives us to action. It makes us angry. It makes us come back there like, here, let us scare the crap out of you. And then you'll come back for more to see what else you need to be scared of. At some point, you've got to cut it off and you've got to start listening to God. And you've got to say, God, what are you calling me to do? And here's a practical one. A lot of people, and this is not a political statement, a lot of people are saying, what do we do about our kids going back to school? Should we homeschool them? Should we send them back? Should we send them to private school? We're fortunate to live in a state where they're giving us the freedom in a lot of ways to choose. But here's the thing. I don't know what you're supposed to do about your kids going to school. But God does. And you need to listen to him about what he says to do. And he may say, I don't want you to do it because you're going to come in interaction with somebody that I don't want you to infect. But here's the thing. God knows. And you've got to ask him, man. And you've got to say, God, should I send my kids back to school? And if he says yes, do it. If he says no, do it. But you got to figure it out on your own. And then you've got to be bold. Because whatever you choose to do, you're going to get some heat. We're living in such a polarized world right now that if you don't send them back to school, people are going to be like, what are you, chicken? And if you send them back to school, people are going to be like, you're endangering everyone. There's no win here, folks. The only win is obedience to God. And this is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, this is literally where the rubber meets the road. And in your life, there's so many areas where this is the case. So what you do is if you feel like God's told you to put your kids to school, slap a mask on them, lather them up with disinfectant, like do what you can, do the best you can, be wise, right? But don't cower in fear. Whatever it is, in this environment, you're going to get heat for whatever you do. And if you're worried about what people might say, you're going to stay bunkered down in your home forever. And your world will shrink. And you'll live in fear. And it'll cause massive, horrible psychological effects on you. But we don't have to live that way. What you've got to do is you've got to drop to your knees and say, God, I don't care what the world around me says. What do I need to do right now? And he may tell you to do something that people say is cowardly, but if you heard it from God and you know it's not fear, seek counsel, seek advice. You do that. He may tell you to do something that people are going to be like, you are a total fool. But you do that. But here's the thing. When you obey God and you do whatever he says boldly, I love this quote. If you be bold, mighty forces will come to your aid. There's something that happens when we get in line with obedience to God, and God's like, oh, you're serious about following me? Watch this. I'm going to breathe in your direction. I'm going to launch you into the future. Right in the worst possible time, right when the storm's all around, if you'll just be bold, if you'll step out of the boat, you may sink a little bit, but man, I got you. I got you, man. Just reach out to me. I'll carry you. And here's the cool thing about this. When you let your light shine before men, they will see your good works and they will glorify your Father in heaven. And that's what happened with Peter there. That's what happened with Peter. All the guys are like, Jesus, okay, we're impressed, but we know you can do that. But Peter? Peter looked like a fool until he wasn't. I bet he used that over and over. Hey guys, you ever walk on water? You know, I remember what it was like. My feet in that water. And they're like, yeah, but you started to sink. Yeah, but I still walked. Right? That's what I believe God wants for all of us, guys. It's time to be courageous, okay? But you got to be wise with your courage. I'm not calling you to go out and do something reckless. And remember, you don't have to invent reckless things to do for God. He's going to put plenty of things in front of you that are going to require risk. And all you've got to do is say, all right, I'm going to do it. And the beautiful thing about it is, even if the worst possible thing happens, you can be convinced of this. Neither life, nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor life, nor death, nor any other created thing is able to separate you from the love of God which is in Christ. He's going to take care of you. You guys receive that? Let me pray for you.
If you are ever in the Seguin area, come visit us on Sunday mornings at 9 or 11 a.m. Or you can just download our app and receive our weekly messages right to your phone. Just text CC Seguin to 77977 and click on the link that you receive. May the remainder of your week be enriched with God's favor and blessings.